I am Daniela Rus, the director of MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, also known as CSAIL. And today I am excited to welcome you to our conversation about sperm whale communication. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Professor Jacob Andreas, Professor Antonio Torralba, and our PhD student, Pratyusha Sharma. Over the past few years, we have looked at sample data from sperm whale communication, which consists of many sequences of individual alphabet pieces called codas that consist of clicks. We have used machine learning to get insights into what codas represent during extensive whale communication. And this work is teaching us a lot about the majestic whales, how they interact with each other, and how their behavior gets associated with communication patterns. Pratyusha, what are the most important discoveries so far?
Previously, people believed that sperm whales produce a fixed set of calls and more or less in the course of an exchange kind of just repeat themselves over and over again. But when we started to look at sperm whale calls in the context of the wider exchange, we started to notice how there's this fine-grained variation in individual calls across larger timescales. And some of these are both perceived as well as imitated by other whales in the conversation. So that goes on to show how there were aspects of the calls of the sperm whales that were previously not known. And there are these additional axes along which they could choose to encode information. Another thing we found when we started to look at these calls in the wider communicative context was that people believed sperm whales produce these clicks and they occur in these tiny packets. But we started to see these one-off clicks that occurred outside of what people called codas. And they did not actually go together with the existing coda types. So over time, we realized how the sperm whale communication system was much more complex and had these very different axes of variations along which sperm whales could additionally choose to encode information. And as we started to study it more, realized that the sperm whale calls were born out of a set of features, and each call was assembled by sampling from a set of basis features. And their combinatorial vocalization systems are exceedingly rare in nature. So we still don't know why and how they arrived at this kind of a communication protocol, but the fact that it exists indicates the possibility that they can, in principle, transmit and communicate about a wider space of meanings and can produce a significantly large repertoire of calls.
It used to be that people believed there were only a few coda types, but we discovered many more. So what does this mean numerically?
So it was previously believed that the whales that we're studying, the sperm whales of the Eastern Caribbean clan, produce a set of 30 different types of calls.
30?
30.
That's not many.
After we found these other axes of variation, we realized how there are these 20 different rhythm types, 5 different total tempo types, this gradual drift, which we can discretize to either the calls speeding up or slowing down or staying the same, and the presence or absence of an extra click, so 2 additional features.
So altogether,
all of these, so a product of all of those numbers, so significantly larger than what was previously thought.
So is this analogous to an alphabet that consists of symbols that can be composed in a multitude of ways?
One of the interesting things is that we still don't really know for an individual coda whether we should think of that as corresponding to something like a letter or something like a word or something like maybe even an entire sentence. But like Pratyusha was saying, one of the things that's really come out of this research project is the discovery that codas themselves at least are built from smaller pieces that can be sort of freely combined in many ways. The amazing thing is that when we think about analogies to human language, this happens at basically every level of structure. Sentences are built from words are built from individual sounds, and even what you think of as the kind of primitive sounds that make up your language really come from combining a bunch of lower level articulatory decisions about where to place your tongue in your mouth, whether to move your vocal cords while you're making the sound or not. and things like that. So, quite where we are in that level of hierarchy, I think, is still to be figured out. But the surprising thing here is that we were finding, like Prathyusha was saying, that kind of combinatorial structure in a system where previously people hadn't thought it existed.
Well, we are collaborating on this project together with a team of biologists, and the project is called Project SETI. It is a TED Audacious project, which means we have funding from a TED Audacious Prize. One of our biologists, Shane Giro, has been studying sperm whales for many, many years. He went to where they live in the Caribbean, and he deployed tags and hydrophones in the water to record them. He painstakingly collected a lot of data throughout the year, and this data covers many, many individuals and many clans. And so this data set was the first hands-on whale communication data set that we were able to work with. Since then, Project SETI has developed new tags, new ways of recording the whale sounds. And in fact, I'm very excited to share that now we use robots, and we have robots to land the tags on the whales. And these tags collect not just sound information, but also information about where the whales are when they vocalize. So how deep? What does the water look like? We even have video associated with some of the tags. All of this is giving us so much additional knowledge about the mysterious lives of whales who live at depth, who live in worlds that we haven't been able to understand and see in the past. And now, with the use of this data, which we can analyze using advanced machine learning technologies, we can begin to understand at least the structure of the language of whales and how this language connects to whale behavior.
The secret sauce is that data. That's the thing that allows all the scientific discoveries that you can make. It's really based on the data that you have. But the initial steps that we took, they really did not rely on any machine learning or any of the new sophisticated tools that exist today. Instead, it was just pure visualization, trying to look at the data, plot it in different ways that were not the typical ways in which people have been studying that data before. And that's what allowed us to see that there was hidden structure in how CODAs organize themselves across time. One of the interesting discoveries that Prathyusha made was that extra click, that we call in the lab extra click. There is a click that doesn't seem to follow the rules of coda formation as people believed before. And that really kind of showed that, okay, something interesting is happening here because they are breaking the rhythm and the structure of what they are saying and repeating, and there are these clicks that appear from time to time, and what is their role? So I think that was the first step.
Let me talk about the extra click, because I still remember the meeting when we talked about that, and we were all so excited and started wondering, is it like a full stop at the end of a sentence? Or what is the significance, right?
That's right. And what other things might be hidden there?
Exactly.
Or what other things we haven't seen yet?
Exactly.
And I guess just to add to the machine learning side of this, one of the really surprising things was just how simple the tools we were able to use to sort of discover all of the structure and the data that we had already. Having found that structure, I think, and sort of knowing what information is in these calls and where it is and how to represent them, we can start to use much more of the modern machine learning toolkit to understand what's going on in the signal, start to do things like train large whale language models to help us understand some of the sort of higher level structure and more complicated aspects of the relationship between vocalization and behavior.
So Prathyusha, how do whales encode information in their clicks?
So whales encode information in their clicks by varying how the clicks are positioned with respect to each other. So by varying the rhythm, which is how the clicks are placed between distances between consecutive clicks, by varying the overall duration of this packet of clicks, by also gradually changing this overall duration over consecutive calls, and by finally adding additional clicks on top of these packets. So for each of these phenomena, we have different names. So the placement of the clicks, we call it rhythm. The overall duration can be clustered into a few fixed buckets, and we call these tempo. This gradual variation across calls in the overall duration, we call it rubato. And finally, this extra click that we've been talking about that occurs on top of existing coda types, we call it ornamentation.
Well, this is so fitting because we have heard whale songs, so it's really wonderful to use inspiration from music to describe the sound variations that make content in the codas that the whales exchange with one another. So is this all random? Or how do we know that there is content encoded in these sequences that undergo tempo, rhythm, rubato, and ornamentation?
So one thing that we do know is that all of these features are both sort of controlled by and perceived by whales. So as they're making very fine-grained variations in the duration of these codas, other whales who are vocalizing at the same time are able to very precisely match those little changes in duration. So they're not random, at least insofar as they're imitated.
One thing we have observed throughout our research is that the whales repeat each other a lot. There is a lot of repetition in individual vocalization, but also the group essentially repeats what the other members of the group say. So that's really interesting.
And one of the big findings from this project was that they're repeating not just entire codas, but sometimes only individual features of codas. Sometimes they're matching their tempos, but not their rhythms, and vice versa. The other big question about whether it's random or not is just how any of this relates to meaning and how it relates to behavior. And I think that's the next kind of big frontier for this project. Now that we've understood something about the structure of the communication system that sperm whales are using then our machine learning toolkit to try to relate it to all of the behaviors that we see groups of whales engaging in together.
So even though we don't understand what the vocalization means, we're very excited because we can use machine learning to predict, to say that in fact the vocalization is not random at the level of the individual and also at the level of the conversation. Antonio, how did we use machine learning for that?
I think that the first thing is we will need more data, and I think that's part of what the Project SETI will do, is going to collect a lot more data, also paired with images so that we know what the behavior is, and I think that part of understanding the language is to understand how the language connects with behavior, because that's the only kind of thing that we will make some sense of. We don't know what is in their heads, what are the stories that they are telling to each other, but we can see what they do.
We know that whales are extraordinarily complex. They navigate across very long distances. They eat a lot. They localize somehow. I would really love to ask them, how do they find their food? How do they figure out where they are located? How do they coordinate in the group? How do they choose who they let in the group and who they expel from the group? There are so many extraordinary behaviors that we have observed, that we have just some intuition that are happening. And in studying whale communication, we hope to break some of these mysteries. I remember the first time when we all got together and we told Pratyusha, we're going to talk to whales. What did you think then?
Well, honestly, I was really amazed. There's so many movies that talk about, how do we communicate with aliens when they come on Earth and so on and so forth. But the sad reality is we don't really know that much about the communication systems that naturally arise on Earth. And just being able to understand a species communication system, understand how they choose to represent meanings, tells us so much about their societies, what aspects of their environment they believe are important. So honestly, I was really surprised, but also at the same time, really excited.
Studying the language of a different species is really opening the door to doing so much more with studying communication, whether it's to robots or to whales or to, who knows, maybe some aliens next time they come to visit us. We can't talk to whales yet. We don't know what they're saying to each other, but we are learning that they have complex vocalization and complex interactions. In the next steps of our project, we will collect much more data. We will collect multimodal data about how whales vocalize and what they do when they vocalize. And we will try to use that data to begin to make inways into the meaning of their discourse.